Hello, my crafty friends. Well, today we are going to do some watercolor stamping. It's a very fun and simple technique, and I have two different ways that you can use this technique in your card making. Hi, it's Lynn Dunn from Stamptastic Designs. Thanks so much for joining me today. In this episode of Stamptastic TV, I have two different ways that you can use the watercolor stamping technique to create just some beautiful cards. And the best part about this technique is it works with any stamp that you have on hand. Now, the cards in this video feature the inked and tiled stamp set from Stampin' Up, so I will be using this large leaf image to do my watercolor stamping. And I will also be using the gorgeously made stamp set. In particular, I'm going to use this little word stamp image here to do my watercolor stamping. So I'm really just combining two different stamp sets, two different images to create the cards that I'm going to share with you today. So first, let's talk about the supplies that you will need to do this watercolor stamping. So you need to choose some ink colors. So for this, I'm just going to use some soft seafoam and Lost Lagoon. You can use any ink colors that you want for this technique. The next thing you need is a silicone mat, and that's for one of the ways that I'm going to show you how to do this technique. So you don't necessarily need it for both. So if you don't have a silicone mat, you can just use this watercolor stamping technique without the silicone mat. So I'm going to show you two different ways, one with and one without. And then you'll need a spritzer. So this is just a little spritzer that I have, and it's filled with water. So you just need some kind of spritzer, little water bottle or something like that. And then I also have some watercolor painters or some water painters. So this is the old style that Stampin' Up had, and then this is the new style. Doesn't matter what you have as long as you have a little painter. So those are the basic supplies that you need. I also recommend that you use watercolor paper because we are going to be spritzing our stamps with water, and we're going to be using kind of a runny ink. I recommend the use of watercolor paper. It'll give you a really nice image. All right, so for this first technique, we are basically going to be adding some ink to our images, just like you would if you were going to be stamping them without watercolor. So let's start with this large leaf image. So basically what I want to do is I just want to ink it up, but I want to use two different colors. So I have my light green up here, and then I have this Lost Lagoon, which is darker down here. So I'm just going to ink it up with the soft seafoam, and then I'm just going to add a little bit of Lost Lagoon, just kind of rocking my stamp a little bit on that ink so that I can get a little bit of that Lost Lagoon on my stamp. And then I'm going to bring in some paper towel, and what I'm going to do is just spritz this. So I'm going to use my spritzer, and I'm just going to spray a little bit of water on this image. And then I'm going to take my watercolor paper and then stamp my spritzed image. And so you can see it gives it a nice watercolor effect. All right, so then you just clean off the image, and then you can do it again. So we'll ink it up with that soft seafoam, and then I'll just rock a little bit of that Lost Lagoon on there. We'll bring back our paper towel, and then we will spritz this. And then once you have spritzed it, then you can bring back your watercolor paper and then just stamp it again. So it just gives it a really, really nice look. And you can do this with any image. So I'm going to use this little word image. So I'm going to ink it up with the soft seafoam, and then I'm just going to add a little bit of Lost Lagoon on there, and then we'll spritz this one. And then we can add this to our cardstock. So let's move this over so you can see it. And then I can just stamp this on here. and it gives it a fun watercolor look. So that's the first way that you can use this technique. You can just ink up your image and then spritz it with water and then stamp it on your watercolor paper. So you can already see that as this starts to dry, it starts to show the detail of that image. So it's a great way to get that watercolor look without actually hand painting or hand watercoloring the images. All right, so the second way that you can use this watercolor stamping technique is to use a silicone mat. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to take those same ink colors and I'm just going to add it to my silicone mat. So I just want to kind of tap this color onto my silicone mat. So that's the soft seafoam. And then I'm going to take the Lost Lagoon and do the same thing. Just kind of tap it on there. And then we are going to spritz it. So I'm going to bring back my paper towel. We'll spritz this. And you can see that as I spritz it, I'm getting beads of color and water, of course. So we'll spritz that up like that. And then I like to just kind of spread out the color a little bit so that it's not all just like pooling in one spot. So and then we are ready to use this for our stamping. So I'm going to take my large leaf image and I'm just going to ink it up with that watercolor and then just stamp it on my paper. So you can just stamp this down just like you would if you were going to be stamping without the water. So I'm going to just ink this up and then just stamp it on my paper. So as you can see, you get the same effect without spraying the image each time. And you don't have to wash your image in between. The reason I had to wash the image before is because you don't want to put water directly on your ink pad. But if you're using this silicone mat, you don't have to continuously wash your image. You can just keep stamping it as much as you want. And so I'm going to use this little word image here and stamp that in there and then stamp it on my project. So I really like this technique more than the previous one because I can just continue to stamp and not have to worry about washing my image. And like I said, you can use this over and over and over again. So I can just grab another piece of paper and just continue to stamp on it. So let's bring back this one. So let's add another leaf to this one. And we'll add this down on the bottom here. And then we'll add another one of these in the center. So the more water you add, obviously the more blurred or the more watercolor look you'll get. But I like to use just a little bit of water so that I can get some of that detail from the stamp image. So that is what it looks like. And then you simply let it dry, and then you can go ahead and decorate your cards. So here are the finished cards that I created with my watercolor stamping. So once you let everything dry, then you can decorate it however you want. I just added a little greeting and some ribbon and things like that. So this is a very simple card design because I really wanted to highlight the watercolor stamping that I did in the background. And if you really like the look of watercolor, you can do a watercolor wash in the back of your card. So you can see that I have the green, you know, that soft sea foam, and that Lost Lagoon is kind of in the background as a watercolor wash. And then I let that dry and did my watercolor stamping over the top of that watercolor wash. So if you're not familiar with the watercolor wash, you can watch the video that I did previously on how to create a watercolor wash. So both watercolor stamping techniques work great. It's just a matter of preference. Do you prefer to ink up your images and then spritz them before stamping them to the watercolor paper? Or would you prefer using a silicone mat and creating your own ink pad right on that silicone mat and using that to watercolor your images? Okay, so there you go. Now you have two different ways that you can use this watercolor stamping technique in your card making. And if you enjoyed these card ideas, feel free to download the printable tutorial. You can find the link in the description below this video. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know by liking it and sharing it with your friends. And leave me a comment below to let me know what you enjoyed most about the video and the cards shared here today. Have a fun and creative day, my friends. Take care.